and tonight we're going to talk about the status of the Vatican today, the state of the Vatican today. What's going on? What are some changes that have been made, etc. And we're going to start with a little bit of history and bring us up to this point, and then we're going to talk about what's going on. So I'm going to be a little daring. I'm going to tell you a story. Okay. I have been on councils and stuff that we've had here, liturgical council and the pastoral council. And every time we do, we sit in that conference room. And Father Fernando's at the end, and he always goes, he always goes, near the Father. And I always want to say, bless us, O Lord, and these thy gifts. I'm sitting at a table. I've blessed myself. Why not? But, I thought about it, and I thought, that actually would be very appropriate, because what are we saying? Thank you for the gifts that we're about to receive. So that's what we're going to do tonight. So in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Bless us, O Lord, and these thy gifts, which we are about to receive through your bounty, through Christ our Lord. Amen. And the same thing as with food, with meals. Sometimes they're fabulous, and sometimes maybe they're too spicy, maybe they're too whatever, but let's hope you'll get something out of this tonight. So tonight we're going to talk about the Vatican. And the Vatican is one of these big umbrella terms. It's like saying Washington, or in some ways perhaps the White House or whatever. But it's a term that is very, very global. It includes a lot of things in it there. And the way that the Vatican exists today is the result of 2,000 years of history. And I'm sure you all know what this means. And one reason, and this is one of our themes for tonight, and I'm going to write this underneath it for a reason. Okay, the church is always reforming itself. And so this is one reason why we go back and we look, well, what happened in the beginning and how does it bring us to where we are now? Because virtually everything, I always, this is like wacky, but I always think of church history like an accordion, or maybe even like more a concertina. It goes in and all the power is centralized, then it comes out and the power is decentralized, then it goes back in. So there's always this push and pull that you see there. There's a tendency to centralize power, then people get unhappy, there's a tendency to decentralize power. I'm not going to talk about all 2,000 years of this. We're going to start that part a little bit later on. But I did want to go over a little bit with you about the beginnings of the Vatican as such. Now, I'm a real word person, and I always want to know, well, what the heck does that mean? Believe it or not, the word Vatican comes from an Etruscan god. His name was variously, do you know that? His name was variously spelled Vaticanus or Vagicanus. But he was the god of babies making their first cry when they came out of the womb. And they had gods for everything, and that's what he was in charge of, making sure that that child, because this was before the era where they suctioned out their mouth and they held them up by their feet and everything. And the reason that they chose him for that is because although we typically in the church use what we call Church Latin or Low Latin, the pronunciation of that in classical Latin in ancient Rome is Vaticanus. So you have wah, wah, wah. And that was why that god was in charge of that first breath, that first call. There's a couple of other theories. Some say, well, there was a prophecy that happened on the Vatican Hill. That's why they chose that. But personally, as a linguist, see? And there you go, right on. Did I put that on? Well, well. Can you? This was not supposed to play right now, and it is, but that's okay. You can turn the lights off, and we'll watch it, and it'll be fine. This is the. Can you put the lights off? Well, they're not going to see anything. Okay. Let me just give you an idea. This is the anthem of the Vatican. It's not called a national anthem. It's called the Hymn National. And here you see the Swiss Guards taking their vow. There's Benedict. That is the flag of the Vatican. And there is, I believe, I can't see from this, it looks like Pope Paul VI. And you can see that this, oh, I can't believe they blew this out of order, but that's all right. The entire sense of this is we are with the Pope. The Pope is part of us, etc. And I want you to notice this little, we missed him. We'll see him again later. Now, this national anthem, or anthem of the Vatican, is played kind of like Hail to the Chief. Whenever the Pope appears at some kind of a meeting, when he went to the White House, they played this. When the Pope was first elected, they play this. Whenever he comes in a solemn profession, and what it does is it brings the contemporary Pope back to that idea of Peter, and the idea that the city of Rome is the city of Peter, and that the Vatican is the city of Peter. So it brings everything back to that Petrine idea there. The authority is in you, and if you're lucky, you're going to get to listen to it again later. But you are the vicar of Christ above all the earth there. You are the light in the darkness. You are the waves. See this man here? I want you to watch him. His name now is Cardinal Krajewski. This, of course, is the Swiss Guards. Okay, let's hope this is just about over. I don't know how I made it play, but... Here? No, I can't. I'm at a bad angle here.
Up on the image. There you go. Do you want it to go?
I want it to... I think with YouTube it goes off when you do that. Okay, this I'm going to have to stand over there. I can't really see it from here. Anyway, that is the national anthem of the Vatican. And anyway, to go back to where we were before it played, the word Vatican comes from this Etruscan god with that sense of wah, wah. It has a sense of proclaiming. From the very beginning, that idea was prophecy, bringing the first cries to the world. This is what we hear, the first thing that we hear from a baby. And so for 2,000 years, more than 2,000 years, because this Etruscan god was way before the Romans came along there, we have that idea of announcing, of bringing that first breath. And if you remember breath, spirit, all of that, bringing this into the church there. Now, I have to be very careful with this. Okay, sorry. Okay, so again, the Vatican is located on the right bank of the Tiber, and as time went on over 2,000 years, the place where Peter was buried became the center of Catholicism there, the center of Christianity. People wanted to come, they wanted to be close to Peter, they wanted to be near where he was buried, etc. So they built, in 313, the Emperor Constantine built a basilica over this area here. And it lasted for quite a while until, in the 13th century, they had the idea to make it even bigger. So the original basilica was built over a necropolis where the dead were buried. It was also where there was the circus, and a circus doesn't mean like what we think of circus. It was kind of like a racetrack or a place where it was built like you can hear the word circle in it, built this way. And it was where the horses raced. It was where the Christians were thrown to the lions. It was kind of like like we would call a race, what we would see at a racetrack today, seats and a lot of entertainment going on there. And so on this area is where, in the 4th century there, Constantine comes in and he builds his basilica there. Now, this is used, the popes don't live there though. They live across the river in the Lateran Palace. So the popes don't live in the Vatican until the 14th century. And by that point, we have had the old basilica mostly taken down. Part of it was built over, but part of it was really destroyed. We've also have a wall built around the city, and it was very high. I want to say 39 feet, maybe. That sounds right to me. This very tall wall that was built in the 13th century around the city when the invasions by the Saracens, etc., began to be a problem. So it really circumscribed the area. And it is what, as time went on, now really is the city, the Vatican City, the city-state within Rome there. As time goes on in Italy, the popes, you've got Italy, you've got that idea of a boot here, kind of like this. It's actually much nicer than that, but then we got our little. And by the time we reach, say, the 19th century, all of this area is called the Papal States. And the popes had not just spiritual domination over it, they had temporal domination over it. And as a matter of fact, all of Italy was divided into these small city-states. And as you get into the 19th century there, with the impulsion of things like the French Revolution, all of a sudden people see they could have power. They could come together and make a nation. And you find Germany and, Italy primarily, they decide to do away with as many of these little city-states as they can. And one of them is the Papal States. And by the time we get to 1870, that's much too big. We have just this little area here, which is what Vatican City is today. And the Pope fought with the King of Italy, and the King of Italy said he was going to attack them. The French came to help the Pope. Then the French had their own problems. They took off, and the Pope declared himself a prisoner of the Vatican. And he said he would not leave the Vatican. He excommunicated the King of Italy, and the King of Italy wasn't real happy with him either. So and from 1870 until 1929, we have the period where the Pope is called the prisoner of the Vatican. He was in that area and he refused to leave it because once he left it, he could have been arrested, or he was afraid if he left the Vatican that he wouldn't be able to get back in. You know, he wouldn't, they would just destroy it, they would disperse it, and Italy would take the whole thing over. So we have several popes in a row that really, once they're elected, confine themselves totally to living within the Vatican themselves. And each of these popes refused to recognize the Kingdom of Italy. They, as I said, excommunicated the kings. If they came out, you see how when the Pope comes out sometimes to give a talk and everything, there's a big square in front of him there. When they come out, when he would come out, if he saw any Italian soldiers or Italian military there or policemen or anything, he would go back in and he wouldn't speak. He wouldn't give them a blessing. He wouldn't do any of this. So it was very, very bitter. And sometimes today it's hard for us to look back and say, well, gee, this is a spiritual dominion here, and this is a government dominion. You know, can't you kind of work this whole thing out? And what the popes came to at that point in the 19th century was they became truly the spiritual head, not the political head of a big territory like that. Prior to that, and we go all the way back through the centuries there, the popes had been kind of like de facto kings. They ran what was going on, just like you would have a king of parts of France or wherever it was, or a duke or something like that. They ran, they got the money that came from their fields, they dispersed everything, and they were, as I said, actual temporal rulers there. Okay, and the standoff between the Pope and, I'm going to try to turn this on again here. I'm going to let her try to turn it back on. Okay, the standoff between the Pope and the country of Italy. Yeah, I don't want YouTube. Good. I want the other one. Okay. The standoff between the country of Italy and the Pope culminated in 1929 with the document. What does it say here? Okay. So it says documents. Here we go. And prior years. You can actually look this document. It's the one on the bottom. If you have, actually it should be right there and it's not. But you can actually, on the Vatican website, look up the document from the Secretary of State, the Lateran Treaty between Mussolini, representing the king, and the Pope, defining exactly what territories are going to, let me just see, I think, I'm going to give that a shot. If it isn't, I'm not going to worry about it. But it's interesting because you can actually see the document on here. Now, this is the Vatican website. Yeah, 1929, here it is. And I don't know that you can open it up here, but there is a live link on this thing that you can actually open it up and you can see the whole document there. And this is a great website here. But so after 1929, the popes are free to travel out of the Vatican. They are free to travel wherever they want. They begin to use some of the media, for example, the radio, eventually television, to communicate, and to go out and to visit beyond the actual Vatican itself. Okay, and now the Vatican City-State is a separate country because of this Lateran agreement. It's called the City and State of the Vatican, and it has its own police force. It has its own, the Swiss Guards are sort of like the Secret Service. They protect the Pope, is what they exist to do. And they're all Swiss. They take an oath. They started in the 16th century. And there was a big attacks on the Pope from various Saracens came in, the Muslims came in, the French came in, and the Swiss Guards were the line of defense, shall we say, between the Pope and anybody that was looking to attack him. And these uniforms are based on drawings from Michelangelo. They did not wear those consistently. They wore them again after the 1920s, but they did not wear them earlier on. So, you know, it came and went, and there were different variations of them. So that's, within this city-state, they are the ones that defend it. And actually, the Swiss Guards, they are all people who have gone through the Swiss Army. They have heavy arms training. It's really funny, if you look on their website, you can see them all in khaki and everything, and shooting, and they're not kidding around. You see those nice big uniforms they have on? They got guns, you know. So they're very well armed. And you've seen, for example, when Pope John Paul II was shot, all of a sudden you saw those people rush up, just like you see the Secret Service rush up that way. They also have, which we just saw, and we should have seen right now, their own national anthem there. And that national anthem is that sense of being based on the direct line coming down from Peter of the popes. And every line of that national anthem celebrates Rome. Oh, happy Rome, oh, noble Rome. And it brings in a lot of the stories from the Bible of Peter. And it constantly, you are the beacon of light. You are what holds back the waves. So it's very, very Petrine, it's very Peter-centered there. They have their flag, which you saw in that video there. And when you see that yellow and white flag, that is the flag, do I dare? No.
Circle with the arrow at the bottom. Right under the red line.
Right under the red line.
In the dark area.
In the dark here.
In the video.
In that video, okay. You know, I really can't see it too well from where I'm standing. But this is the papal flag. I wonder if I can put that on. That is the papal flag. And you see here, this is the flag of the city-state of the Vatican. It's not the flag of the Catholic Church. You see a lot of, in fact, I don't know if we have one anymore. I think we did at one point. But you see it there, and it is the papal tiara there. You see the king, the keys. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of God. And this is flown all over the Vatican City-State. And also, if you see the Pope go on an international visit to somebody, when he came to see Obama, for example, you saw the city-state things on the end there. And here are your Swiss Guards. We're going to stop this little thing. Possibly we're going to stop it. Good. Okay, so they have their own money. They have their own stamps. They have their own post office. And a lot of Romans, if they have to mail something, especially overseas, they'll take it into to the Vatican, to mail it from the Vatican, because they think that the Vatican post office is much more efficient than the Italian post office. And one of the real big money makers for the Vatican is stamps. People will go in, they buy the Vatican stamps, and that's one of their real things that they do to support themselves there. So it's like any other country that way, except it is the only country in the world. It's the smallest universally recognized nation in the world, but it's the only one that has an elected monarch for life. Okay, and so they elect their monarch, their king, and he serves for life. Any place else that has something like that, they have term limits, you know, or they don't elect them, you know. It's very, or they're not a king. They're not the de facto head of the entire thing there. There are, would anyone like to guess how many citizens there are of the Vatican? How many? A little more. Less. At the last number I could find was 650. And what it is, you have to live either. You have to live in the Vatican. The Swiss guards, they have barracks there, they live there. The people that tend the Vatican, that work there, or you have to be assigned to certain things within the Vatican and actually live there, or the biggest contingent is the foreign diplomats. So just as we have an ambassador to Rome, Rome has an ambassador to the United States, an ambassador to France. All of these people, they have Vatican citizenship. And also priests that are like cardinals that are assigned to countries for diplomatic reasons, they have citizenship in the Vatican. So, hold on. Does anybody know who the United States ambassador to the Vatican is? I'll give you a hint. I can't believe you don't know this. I'll give you a hint. Now, you couldn't walk to this person's house, at which point they lived in, but you probably could bike there from here. Newt Gingrich's wife. And we are not saying anything about that. At one point I thought, maybe I would write to her, see if she wanted. Then I thought, maybe I wouldn't, and that would be okay. So, but she's from Cobb County. The ambassador to the Vatican is from Cobb County.
Is it his present wife?
Very well put. I did not say that. She said that. Yes, his present wife. Exactly. Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, so she is from here, but actually, it functions as a country. She is a convert, I believe. Yeah, she is Catholic. I think she's a convert, but she is Catholic. The majority of the citizens live abroad. And as of this number that I had here was 2011, 71 cardinals, 109 members of the Swiss Guard, 51 members of the clergy, and one nun that lives inside the Vatican walls, one nun. So you got one woman that's a citizen, and I don't know what else to tell you. The largest group were 307 members of the clergy in diplomatic positions around the world. So now Vatican City covers an area, any guesses? 100 acres. Now, this is what I figured out. It's probably not true. Take a subdivision that has, let's say, 300 houses in it. I think what's it called? I think Chastain Lakes might work. But I don't think, what's the one right up from it? Chestnut Hill. I think Chestnut Hill's too big. It's too big. But I think around, they say you can walk the perimeter in 40 minutes. Okay? Now, with the Lateran Concordat of 1929, there are buildings outside the wall that are called extraterritorial Vatican. And it's kind of like an embassy because they didn't have enough space inside to have these different offices that they need to have. So they're located in buildings, but they are treated like embassies. In other words, everything that goes on there is Vatican. They don't pay Italian taxes. They're guarded by Vatican, whatever. So I thought that that was very interesting. They sort of outgrew their ability to govern there. There are 5 entrances to Vatican City. Each one of them is guarded by pontifical Swiss guards and by the Gendarme Corps of the Vatican City State. That's their police department. Prior to late 1960s, there was an army. The Pope actually had an army, but Pope Paul VI, after Vatican II, did away with the army. He didn't think that that was appropriate. I don't know what happened to them. I don't know whether they retired with a pension or whatever. Okay, now we heard that wonderful hymn there. And we're not going to hear it again because, let me tell you about that. It will stick in your mind for days. You will go around singing, oh, feel it. And people will be saying, would you just shut up? It is one of those earworm songs. It just kind of, you know. You know, my business partner, we were driving one day and she said to me, we were talking about some music playing. She said, oh, I never get that out of my head. I said, you know, I have that same problem with the Vatican national anthem. She goes, what? Let me play it for you. And remember, I'm using that term. It's really called not the national anthem, is what I call it, not the national anthem. But it's the easiest way in English to kind of express it there. Now, we're going to talk a lot tonight about the Curia. And we think we can get rid of this. Yeah, I know, in theory. There we go. Now, this is the current Roman Curia. And I'm going to talk about this website for a second here. This is a fabulous website, and I will tell you why. This guy, I think he lives in Florida, and he's been doing this for a long time. This website has, it's called CatholicHierarchy.org. If I were to hit bishops on here, it lists every Catholic bishop in the world. And remember, one of the things that we feel with the bishops is that their power comes down from Peter. So it ties back to what we're talking to here. And on this website, you could pull up Bishop Wilton Gregory. You could see who ordained him, who, all the way back, in most cases, to the 16th century, because unfortunately, there was one bishop that went throughout Europe ordaining people, but the records are lost. So there's for many of these bishops, there's a break there. However, for others, you really can go all the way back to the 2nd century, the 3rd century. It's very, very interesting. But anyway, but what he has here is, this is the Roman Curia, all the different offices. And we're going to look at the Vatican thing that we had up before here. But these are all of the different, now they're called dicasteries, except for the Secretariat of State. Dicasteries, and this is where the work gets done. And again, you can pull that up. Let's say you, for some interesting reason, want to know, what does it really take to have a saint made? Or, you know, I really like Saint so-and-so, so-and-so, and she's now a blessed, and what's going, you can hit the causes of the saints. You'll see where her thing is going on there. If you want to know doctrine of the faith there, that has to do with teachings, it has to do with missionary work, divine worship. If you got a question, you know, I wonder when they put this in, bing, hit it there. So this is a really very, very good website, but you can see there are a lot of offices there in the Curia. Now, with luck, does that look like it says VA? No, this does. Yes. Okay, this is the official Vatican website, and this is the Curia, and this is one of the things I want to talk to you about tonight. This is kind of where the work gets done. This is where the controversies come from. This is where, when they write those thriller novels about the guy that went in and he found that document and he was under the table or whatever, usually the Curia and some of these offices plays a role in that. And one of the things, as I told you with that accordion effect, being tighter and looser, has to do with the relationship between the sitting Pope and the Curia. Now, if we can go back for a second to the 19th century, to Pope Pius IX, and I know you all remember this. Who remembers what council he called? I'm not looking because I don't want to cry. Vatican I, very good. Okay, see, I didn't have to cry. Okay, so the first Vatican Council was called by Pius IX. Okay, and who remembers where you see his name when you drive to Florida? Do you remember? Macon. That's right. Do you ever go to Macon and you see the exit? What does it say? Do you remember? Pio Nono. It's a big street in Macon. And there used to be, it's true, there used to be a seminary there that was founded, I know, Pio Nono. I mean, everybody thinks it's some Indian name. I think it's an Indian name, you know? And one time I had a class, this one Spanish guy said, and you cannot guess. You keep your mouth shut. Because it's very close to what it is in Spanish. But anyway, Vatican I was called by Pius IX. Now, go back to what I told you about how he was truly under siege. The government of Italy was trying to put all of the Italian states together, and he had a siege mentality. He also had a very long pontificate. So the one thing that he wanted to accomplish during Vatican I, does anyone remember? It has to do with the accordion. We give the power, we take it away. We give it, we take it away. Well, I'll just tell you. It was the doctrine of papal infallibility. During the time that Vatican I was going on, as I said, for much of that time, the Vatican itself was literally under attack. They were really afraid that at any moment they would be invaded. The Papal States were invaded. They didn't come within the Vatican. You know, Italy has always had a love-hate relationship with the church. Hey, they're all Catholic, except, well, you know, go to Mass, maybe not. So there's always an identification and at the same time a pushback with the Italians and the Catholic Church. And part of it has to do with the fact, going back historically, that the Pope did control big sections of Italy and was kind of a civil ruler as well as a religious ruler. So anyway, during The one thing that we remember from Vatican I, the one thing that remains there is papal infallibility. By the time he wanted this voted on right up front. And the bishops kept kind of pushing it back, changing the agenda. And he was having a fit because that's the thing he wanted to discuss. And finally he said to one of his, if they don't vote on this, I'm just going to declare it myself. That's how strongly he felt about it. But this is, of course, a centralization of power, all in the Pope. Now, even though, as it finally was promulgated, papal infallibility, the Pope cannot err when he teaches ex cathedra from that throne, from that, in his position, on matters of faith and morals. And it's been used once since then. But what he was looking to do was almost to prove that he was in charge, if I can put it that way. People will fight me on this, but that's kind of the psychological thing. He was under siege by this was a way to push back and say, this is where the power comes from, okay? And this is how I can declare myself, etc. So as you go along, papal infallibility, we kind of have, I'm going to say, not too much pushback as we're moving along. Most of the popes that follow him, you have Leo the 13th, Pius the 10th, Pius the 11th, I think a Benedict in there. Then we come to Pius the 12th. All of them were very strong central managers. They gathered everything in, and they were very, very much in control. After we have Pius the 12th, who comes next after Pius the 12th? Yes! Good. Not that I think you thought you would know it, but you never know. Okay, so in 1958, I want to say, but it might be 59. I think it's 58. Okay, we have Pope, John the 23rd. And those of you that have ever been in my class know that I'm very prone to write the 22nd. Is the 22nd right? It's the 23rd. 23rd. I know, I always confuse it. I can't straighten it out. I have thought of mnemonics and everything. I just hit it right tonight. Okay, so now we have gone forward 80 years since the doctrine of papal infallibility was put in and everything was centralized. Now, what do you know about Pope John? You know, he didn't come from the aristocracy. He grew up in a little village. You know, he fought in World War I. He was a soldier. You know, he was a diplomat. He wasn't so much into having all that power there. He was kind of much more into decentralization. So when he convenes his, we all know what this one is, or I'm leaving. Okay, Vatican II. And you're lucky there's not a quiz, just saying. Okay, so when he calls Vatican II, a lot of things happen that have to do with the way the Vatican is going to go on until our days here. For one thing, he's got 2,500 bishops, give or take a couple on any given day. And that's true, it's true. There were about 2,700 altogether. But remember, this went on from 62 to 65. So, you know, people broke their legs, people had whatever happened to them. So not everybody showed up all the time, but most everybody was there most of the time. So we go from that siege mentality. Now these people look around and they have a real demonstrable experience of the worldwide church. They experience the church like this, as opposed to being centered in Rome. They they were seated, some of you that took my classes know this, but I'm going to tell you anyway, because I'm sure you never forgot. But when they sat the bishops in the order in which they were ordained. And you sat there the whole time. So let's say you're the Bishop of Bombay. You were ordained in May of 1945, and you're from Perugia, Italy, and you were May 45. You're June 45. You're from Bombay, and you are in July, and you're from New York City. So throughout the entire thing, you're going to get to know this guy. You're going to think, God, I never knew that this happened in Bombay. Oh, and in Bombay, we have this problem. Oh, New York, we don't have any problems like that. You know what our problems are. So everybody gets to talk to each other about what was going on, what the problems were throughout the entire world. And at Vatican II, they sat in these kind of like bleachers. Not bleachers, okay? Like this. And behind them, oh, this is just so great. Okay, there were 2 coffee bars. One was called Bar Jonah, and the other was called Barabbas. And so, so maybe you from New York and you from Bombay, you get in there and you're like, oh, so-and-so's talking today. I'll tell you what, watch it. 10 o'clock, we are out of there, we're eating coffee. So what happens is the people begin to know each other. They get to experience each other. My father used to say in the old times when you went to the ball field, you can't tell the players without a scorecard. Well, it was the same thing there. These were names maybe you had only heard, but you never knew who this person was. Now, all of a sudden, they saw these people. They knew who they were. And it began to have a different feel. So that accordion kind of starts to open up here. We have very deep discussions over the sessions of Vatican II. We have theological meetings that go on. If you spoke German, hey, tonight we're having bratwurst over at the German seminary there. Why don't you come? Oh, I have never had bratwurst. Oh, you'll like it. Come. Okay? And this is exactly what happened. So again, you begin to decentralize your thoughts. Plus, they came up. Oh, I'm going to blow it. I am going to blow it. I'm going to have to look it up. All I can think of is subsidiarity, and that's not it. Okay. It means decentralizing control. And I can't remember the word for it. Hold on a second. Subsidiarity, and it means putting the power out among the bishops. Let's see what it says here. Just 1 second here. Oh, I can't believe I've just blanked out on it. Collegiality. Oh, I can't believe it. I couldn't think of that. Collegiality. Okay. So this becomes a doctrine that collegiality is both proposed and promoted and voted on at Vatican II. And what it says is when the bishops all meet together, their voices have a strong, maybe not the infallibility that the Pope has, but you better sit up and listen to them. So this doctrine of collegiality, now we're taking the accordion and we're stretching it out. And so we begin to see more delegation of things rather than centralizing everything in Rome. As a result, we have bishop conferences, the USCCB. And let me tell you, the USCCB, I have a love-hate relationship with, if we're just going to be honest. But they have a very good website, and it means the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. However, one thing that I use them for all the time If you ever want to look up a Catholic scripture quotation, and you like, thou art Peter, or something like that, put in USCCB and then write the thing out, and you will get the quote out of the New American Bible, the Catholic version of the Bible there, because otherwise you get all different kinds of things. So that's a good way to do it. Plus, there is the Colombian bishop, the CEC, I believe it's called. That's all the bishops from Colombia. There's one in Canada. And this is an idea of decentralization. And this is something, when we talk about the Vatican today, we're moving now in a couple of seconds into a lot of controversy going on. And one of the controversies that is going on right now is because the German bishops and cardinals want to have maybe a little bit more freedom in making decisions. And they tend to be kind of out there. They tend to be very progressive. One of the things that they wanted to do was to say, if you have a Catholic and a non-Catholic married and they come to Mass all the time, that non-Catholic should be able to receive communion. These are some of the things that have been proposed. I am not saying that these things are going to pass or that they did pass. I'm just giving you examples of things that have been floating around in their minds. Whether or not divorced people can receive communion, things like this. And they say, we understand the situation in our country. We should be able to make local decisions on this. And this is the accordion stretching out. Yes?
Isn't that the same thing that's happening in South America or about the marriage?
Yes. Also, with the Amazonia, that conference is coming up on the 5th or something of October. It's coming up very close. And actually, they're going to meet originally, almost certain in the Vatican, this meeting is going to take place. But what it is it's all the bishops from the Amazonia region, Brazil, some of the others that I don't know what they are, but they're all in Latin America. And again, one of the things, and you've heard this bandied back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, that they want, that has been proposed, I'm going to use the passive voice there, has been proposed, is that they vir probati, older men of good character, probably deacons, should be able to be ordained priests. And I just read a thing today. It can cost $600 for them to bring a priest into a parish to say Mass. Now, the usual monthly salary, maybe, it might be annual, is $250. Their entire budget of these dioceses are used because they've got to buy the gasoline for the engines on these little like canoe boats, but they have engines, and they got to bring it all with them because there's nowhere to buy gas there. And then sometimes they have to fly in. And it's eating up their entire budget just to bring people in once every 6 months or once every 3 months, where if they had local people, they would be able to solve that part of the problem. It's a money problem for these people, not just a spiritual problem.
But it's not only about ordaining the older deacons. Isn't there a thing in there about priests, young men being able to get married and function in the future? Or is that something else?
What a great question. Do you know the expression, it's in the air? And this is what some people are afraid of, that they'll start with saying the deacons. Then the next thing you know, they'll say, well, these younger people. And again, over at Margarita, I could tell you what I think about that. Standing here, and I can't. So, but there is a lot of division going on right now, and a lot of pushback, and a lot of priests saying this is a slippery slope. You're going to start down that slope, and the next thing you're going to say is, well, if we can ordain them at 35, why can't we ordain them at 27? If we can ordain them at 27, what about 25? Whatever it happens to be. So,
And the way women are becoming deacons, is that on the slippery slope too?
what an excellent question that is. That is an excellent question. I think it depends whom you ask that question to. And I would say, bring that question up whenever you see somebody with a collar on, ask them that question. A lot of times, well, don't stop. I don't want to know the answer, but I'm just saying. Yeah, it's in the air. It's en l'air, as we say, okay? But these are some of the things right now that are divisive in the Vatican. And it's because, again, when you had, well, we took them off here, in the 19th century, you did not have people that were well educated, that were well traveled, and they were much more likely to take authoritarian fiat because I said so. You're going to do this? Yeah, but see, it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any difference if it doesn't make any sense. So what? You got to spend your budget on the boat, you know? Whatever. And so in the 21st century, in the 20th century, after Vatican II, during Vatican II, but into the 21st century, you have your well-traveled, educated people who have been taught in school not to take everything but to question it and to whatever. So, good question. Ask it of somebody, not me. I think that's a good advice there. Okay, but we're going to talk about, we've got this idea of all of these people coming together, getting to know each other, saying, you know, there's a lot of smart people in this room. There's a lot of holy people in this room. There's a lot of people that are holy and smart and theologians, etc. So, what happens? Pope John dies after the first session of Vatican II. And he is followed by? Good. Okay, Paul VI. Okay, Paul VI there. Now, Paul VI, and some of you will remember, it is said that both John the 23rd and John Paul II, they never had a doubt in their minds about anything that they said. You know, they were pretty self-confident. Paul, on the other hand, he was one of those, I don't want to say he dithered, but he had trouble making a decision and sticking to that decision in the face of opposition. And it didn't have to be big opposition. One example is when John the 23rd died, they wanted to hail him a saint by acclamation, which is possible because all the bishops were there. But he was kind of afraid that if he did that, see, his mentor was Pope Pius XII. How would it look if John was made a saint by acclamation and Pius had to go through the whole rigmarole? So he said, as a compromise, well, we'll open up organization. Remember I showed you that the causes for the saints dicastery there. We'll do this and we'll pursue them both at the same time. Same thing with Humani Vitae, the thing about birth control. And that is something you really owe it to yourself to find a good history and read that, because it would give you some idea into some insight. But anyway, he was not perhaps as forthright as he might be. But by the same token, he ran the rest of the council, and at the end of the council, he did very good things for the Curia. He got rid of a lot of the places that were extraneous, that were, you know, that were double, and he really streamlined the Curia very much. Hold 1 second. And in fact, with this collegiality, in Lumen Gentium, the doctrine on the church, the document on the church, when they talked about collegiality, this sharing, he got a lot of pushback from conservative cardinals, to the extent where he passed the document, but he made them put a footnote in there about the fact that they still had to confer with the Pope and blah, 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 blah. And when you look at Vatican II, now that's 1962, some of those bishops there were in their 80s. They were born in the late 19th century. They had lived through World War I, World War II. They had lived through a lot of catastrophe in their life and everything. So a lot of them were much less daring in a sense. They were much more conservative. Okay, so we have Pope, wherever he is, Paul. And he begins the work of shaping up the Curia. But Pope John the 23rd called Pope Paul, he called him Hamlet because he was to be or not to be. He could never make his mind up on anything. He did. He used to call him that. He used to call him Hamlet. Anyway, so he did begin to shape up the Curia. And the Curia was in constant tension with the Pope. Who was going to rule? And sometimes the Curia would, especially the, in Latin, it's the Propaganda Fidei, the propagation of the faith. That's not what it's called in English. I can't remember what it's called in English. What is it called? No, it's this one. Doctrine of the faith. See, I can't see it over there. Okay, so anyway, he kind of would get these things from these different dicasteries or curial offices there, and they would be sent out, and they would be promulgated, and the Pope had never even looked at them. That was a bit of a problem. But while he had problems with some things, he did authorize the use of the vernacular in the Mass and the sacraments, approved a new order of Mass, infuriating conservatives who felt that the Missal of Pope Pius V from about the 15th century should not be changed. Not thinking it had already been changed. So whatever, and this is still a problem. If you go on some of these very conservative websites, it's like what is his name here? Pope Pius V said this could never be abrogated under mortal sin. This would never be changed, blah, blah, blah. So Pope Pius V is a big hero of many of you real conservative people here. Now, Pope Paul dies. And something very interesting happens. Now, he dies 13 years after the council. And so they come to vote on a new pope. Well, can you remember going to a business meeting, a party, a dinner, Thanksgiving with somebody 13 years ago? You sure can, you know? So when the bishops come to, or the cardinals rather, to elect a pope this time, they know all those players, you know? And they're kind of divided. They got a real conservative that wants to go back. They got some real progressives. And all of a sudden, one name starts to circulate. And that was Karol Wojtyła from Poland. And if you remember John Paul, he had a great personality. He was the one you wanted to have coffee with at the, you know, he was the one that you were saying, listen, 11 o'clock, you, me, okay? And I mean, he was very outgoing. At they had a mass right before the conclave. And somebody said to him, all the cardinals were there, how many cardinals in this room do you not know personally? He said 7. So he knew all the players. And when they got kind of hung up on these Italians, the name that kept cropping up was Karol Wojtyła. He was young. He was very, very learned. We don't always take that into consideration, but he was very, very learned. He was very popular. They felt he was somebody they could work with. So the tentacles of Vatican II reach up to John Paul. Well, first of all, they have John Paul I. I shouldn't skip him over. But 33 days. 33 days. But again, he had a great personality. He was outgoing. He was everybody's buddy. He knew all the players. He was Italian. After he went, they brought them all back again, and this is when they had this big debate, because people had gone home a month before and said, you know, we should have voted for Joe. You know, I thought that too. What the heck? Or, I told you from the beginning, it should have been Albert, and now we got this guy, and, you know, now he died, or whatever happened to him. So, but coming back, all of a sudden now, for the first time in 500 years, they know this guy from Poland. They know who he is. They know what he's like.
I heard rumors all my life that John Paul I was assassinated.
I know that you have. There is a really good book. It's called The Year of Three Popes. And it's 1950, it's not right, 1970, it's 13 years, whatever the date was.
He died on the 29th.
Yeah.
They said
Yeah.
it was the 28th. He actually died
Yeah.
on the 29th.
So if you read that, there are many, many theories. People say he was murdered by the mafia. People say all kinds of stuff. I don't know. So that's a good book, though, The Year of Three Popes. And, but anyway, what leaves the door open to an Italian pope is Vatican II, because before, the Italians all knew each other. They would get together, they'd vote for somebody. Now, all of a sudden, they know somebody that's not Italian. And this carries on through to Benedict, who had been at the council and was very, very well thought of, even though he's much later on. He was very, very well thought of. He was a German. And down to Bergoglio, again, coming from the peripheries, coming from far away. I'm going to skip some of this because there's too much stuff here, and I don't know what else to tell you. But remember, we had Pope Benedict comes in, and John Paul II, and here's your accordion. John Paul II was 58 when he took office. And he was in for like 25 years. They're like, oh, not again. We get somebody old, short, bingo. And so Benedict was a really good choice. People liked him. He was smart. He was holy. He was old. This could work. So they bring him in. Okay, there's other reasons too. Sorry. But that was one of the best things he had going for him, because they really wanted time to sort of think of who they were going to, you know, who would be the next long-term person. So they bring Benedict in. And he's a good person. But he is an older person. And at this point, when we talk about all of the factions in Rome, in the Vatican, there was a lot going on. There was what they called Vati leaks, where his butler leaked a lot of documents that he had written. There were just a whole lot of intrigue going on. And he was under a lot of pressure from people that wanted the accordion to go this way and people that wanted the accordion to go that way. People that wanted to head this Curia thing, people that they didn't want him to head it. So he had a lot of tension, a lot of stuff going on. And finally, he prays about it and he says, I can't do this anymore. I'm too old. I'm too infirm. I just can't do it anymore. And that changed the papacy forever, because all of a sudden, you could have an emeritus pope. And when he resigned, and you could look this up on the internet and it will hit you on the head, because one of the problems, if you've heard people say, well, you know, there's such a schism going on these days in the Catholic Church. There is such division, and it's all Francis's fault. Actually, the people who talk about that are the people that are putting the burr under the saddle. And very much they're people who want things to go back the way they always were. They want the Mass the way it always was. They want everything the way it always was. But the way that it always was is 1950 in Brooklyn. Okay? They don't have a historic point of view. What they see as the way that the Mass was before Vatican II, it never, ever changed. It was always this way. there is no better way to go to know your faith than to really study church history, because you see how it develops. You see how the history of the world influences the history of the church, influences the history of the world. You see that interaction, and you can deal with this stuff so much better. So after all of a sudden Benedict resigns, now we have a very different kind of a conclave. It's not kicked off by a funeral mass. It is kicked off by a lot of meetings going on. Now, you don't have too many people that were actually at Vatican II, but you've still got that kind of mindset going on there. And again, what they did before the conclave, because they weren't having funerals and funeral stuff like this, they got together and they had a possibility for people to get up, cardinals, and say a few words. And if you wanted to, this one. Bergoglio gets up. And Bergoglio gets up and he has his, right here, he's got a little piece of paper. He's got a little small handwriting and he's got bullet points. And he says, I'll tell you what I think we should do. I think instead of resisting the world and fighting the world, what we have to concentrate on is evangelizing the world, reaching out to the world. He's hearkening back really to Vatican II. He says, this is where our emphasis has to be. It has to be a spiritual emphasis. And we can't get anywhere with just telling the world what they're doing wrong. What we need to do is show them what we're doing right, evince our love of Jesus, bring this. We don't want to proselytize, we want to witness, and there's a big difference. And that's another controversy. There are people that hate him for that. But the idea of proselytizing, okay, it's not if you don't become Catholic, you die. But it could be if, if you don't become Catholic, you're not getting lunch tomorrow. I don't know what to tell you. In other words, it's kind of like forcing your ideas on people, as opposed to witnessing, where you send a missionary out. And these people want to, they see a joy, they see a person that's very happy with themselves, that has a good relationship with God, and they want to be like that person. Anyway, people were very impressed by his idea of having a forward-looking papacy, and one that really brought Christ to the world, not fought off the world. Okay, now he gets elected right away. We've got dissension going on, because he is, from the very beginning, he doesn't want to wear the big, heavy, gem-encrusted thing. He's wearing his old shoes. He's living in the hotel. He's very anti what many of the princes of the church feel they've earned. I live in Rome. I'm a cardinal. Right. You know, I'm important. And it's a natural thing. So his whole, especially being an order priest, especially being a Jesuit, his whole orientation is simplicity, the poor, that's where our money should go, etc. And so from the beginning, he was rubbing some of these cardinals the wrong way. They were probably thinking, what did we do? But again, remember, and I'm not going to keep you till midnight. We're reaching the end, folks. But he was from Latin America. So much of our population now is from the peripheries, as he said, from Latin America, from Asia, from Africa. And there was kind of a coalition that got together and backed him, thinking this guy knows our problems. This guy is going to be looking at the whole church, not just what's going on in Rome or Milan or something like this. And so as his papacy has gone on, he hasn't changed. And that kind of has made some people not like real too happy. But one of the things he wanted to do from the very beginning, and virtually every pope who has gone in has had this idea, reform the curia. because what has happened is the courier would literally send things out and the Pope would find out about it weeks later. And it might not have been quite what he had in mind, might not have been said the same way, etc. So he wanted to streamline it, simplify it. Instead of, good. If you can look, this is a fabulous, I mean, if you're really into the courier, this is a fabulous little website here. But okay, here we are. Okay, the top curial place is the Secretariat of State. And that's probably going to remain the top place. And I'm sorry if you can't see because of this, but whatever. It has to be run by a cardinal. Right now, the person running it is Cardinal Parolin, and he is the top diplomat. But also, out of this comes a lot of decisions that form the way that we really lead our lives. Let's see, back. You know, if I could see it. If I do that, I think it's going to, there we go. Oh, good for me. Okay, right now, the second in importance is the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, Propaganda Fidei. And this is one where a lot of decisions are made and enunciated and set out. And then people are like, what the heck? So this is one of the curial offices that has needed to be reined in a little bit. And what Francis is saying now, this used to be the top office, now the Secretary of State is. And the others are all going to be considered the same. They're going to be on a level ground here. And when you came in, I wrote this down, and then I wrote all over it. Okay, there is a document coming out. We're going to need that board over there again in a second. And theoretically, this document was coming out in April. And then it was coming out in June, which is when I thought, oh, this would be great to teach from. Well, unfortunately, then it was coming out in September. So it hasn't come out yet. But it's called Ecclesia. Oh, it isn't. I didn't write it down there. I thought I wrote it there. Sorry. It is called, okay. It's called Predicate Evangelium. Preaching the gospel. Now, I think it's very telling that the document that Francis is putting out on organization, what does he call it? To preach the gospel. Because his emphasis is more on not that you're so important because you're the head of this, but how does your office help preach the gospel? How does it spread the love of Christ? How do we reach people this way? This is this new document that's coming out any day now. We don't know when. But, Francis was elected in 2013. 2014 Christmas, everybody's happy. It's like right before Christmas, and the Pope sits and he talks to all the cardinals from the Curia, all the probably bishops too, from the Curia, and he kind of gives them a little Christmas talk, and how, you know, you did a good job this year. You're not getting a raise, but you didn't make any money anyway, so who cares, you know? Okay, so everybody comes and they have their little whatever they have, and he gets up and he says, he talks about the diseases of the Curia and the things that are wrong with it. And he goes on and he says, the 15 ailments of the Curia. I'll just read you a few. They could also work in marriage. Feeling immortal, immune, or indispensable. A Curia that doesn't criticize itself or update itself, doesn't seek to improve itself, is a sick body. Working too hard to impress other people. Becoming spiritually and mentally hardened. Planning too much, never getting anything done. Okay, working without coordination. Having spiritual Alzheimer's, these are his words. We see it in people who have forgotten their encounter with God, in those who depend completely on the here and now, on their passions, whims, and manias, in those who build walls around themselves and become enslaved to the idols that they have built with their own hands, being rivals or boastful, suffering from existential schizophrenia, the sickness of those who lead a double life, the fruit of hypocrisy that is typical of mediocre and progressive spiritual emptiness that academic degrees cannot fill, committing the terrorism of gossip, glorifying one's bosses. I believe in the United States we call that, I don't think I could say that here. Okay, but you know what I mean. Being indifferent to others, having a funereal face, you know, just to show how holy you are, wanting more, forming closed circles that try to be stronger than the whole, seeking worldly profit and showing off. Some of these cardinals have these fabulous apartments and blah, 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 and they get a little donation here, they get a little donation there, whatever. And when he finished this talk, there was they called it tepid applause. Okay? And not any smiles. Nobody thought that was good. Now, the next year he talked about the positive things, the joys, etc. But this is about 18 months into his pontificate. And he's already laying the ground for this. So, what's going on in the Vatican today? Francis is really trying to make us a church that puts preaching the gospel first, preaching to the people in the peripheries first, getting our emphasis where it needs to be, cutting down as much as we can on red tape, and putting lay people in charge of some of these curia offices and putting women, if not, women might be in charge of the one on communications, I'm not sure. But for the first time, the curia office for religious, priests, nuns, brothers, has, I think, 3 or 4 nuns on it. Before, they were all priests and brothers. So bringing women in, bringing lay people in, giving these people real jobs, not just, you're on the masthead, don't show up. So this is what's going on. And the accordion is out at the moment. And there are a lot of people that feel once that accordion is out, we don't have that strict constructionism that we need. You know, you remember your American history, you had the strict constructionist and the loose constructionist. Francis is a loose constructionist. Those that are against him are like, fasting from midnight, you 12:01 mortal sin. Okay, and I'm serious. Okay, so I hope that you've learned something from this. I hope, if nothing else, if you have your email there, I'll send you some links, some of these links that I so badly did with this board. But I'm going to have to come in and practice with this board some more. Oh. There? Okay, well, that's good enough. That'll be good. Okay, anyway, exactly. So we'll put all of that on there. At one point when I was preparing for this, I was going to do a PowerPoint, and I thought, oh, that's all I need on top of everything else. But what kind of started me thinking about this was this document that was coming out, but also all of these thriller novels that have to do with the corridors of the Vatican, and you know, all of these crazy things, Dan Brown, all this, and there's a ton of them. Once I started to look, it's like, oh, you know what I should have done? We should have just had a book club and read one of those every month. But anyway, because they were like so wackadoodle. But good, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. And thank you very much for coming.
Before we go, can you tell us your 3 classes that are coming up?
Oh, yes. My 3 classes that are coming up, and don't have the date with me right here.
October 7th,
October 7th,
October 21st,
October 21st.
October 28th.
See, they're all divisible by 7. You could remember them, 7, 21, 28. And you thought I couldn't do math, just because I couldn't remember the 23rd. One is going to be liturgy in the 21st century, one is going to be the church in the 21st century, and the other one is going to be ecumenism in the 21st century. And that's very important. So I hope that you will all come. I hope that you enjoyed this. And there you go. Thank you. Am I unfair?